What's up guys, my name is Tetos, and in this 10th installment of my Play Like a Pro episode I will teach you how to play Anivia like Froggen. Now of course you can't just copy him exactly on a whim and join the LCS at the same time. It's not as easy as that, but I will teach you his playstyle, his build, his pre-game setup, so summoner spells, runes, etc. as well as spell combos, laning phase, teamfights and more. Froggen always takes Ignite and Flash on Anivia, and he takes the Flash obviously because Anivia doesn't have an escape spell herself, and the Ignite for increased lane dominance and pressure so he can get kills easier. Now these are the two rune pages he's running on Anivia, and he takes the first one against an AP lane, and for AD lanes, for AD matchups such as Talon or Zed, you definitely want to pick up the armor seals instead of the scaling health seals. For Masteries, Froggen is running a standard 21, 0 and 9 page. The only two things that are worth mentioning is that he doesn't get the Feast Mastery in the offense tree, which actually is pretty strong 1-point mastery. Instead he gets the 5% CDR instead of the 3.75%. And in the utility tree he gets the movement speed instead of the flat mana and health regeneration, because Anivia is a very slow moving bird and has a very low base movement speed. For skill order, it should be said that you go R before E before Q before W, but if you pay attention to the sheet on the screen right now, you can see that he gets the W at level 8, so very late into the game he gets his third spell, his third basic spell, and also you can see that he goes Q, E, E, Q, E at level 1 to 5, which is the standard max for maximizing your damage in lane, because of course you want to max the E before the Q before the W, and also the ultimate whenever possible. And you can also see that he goes for the Q max second, so he gets 2 points in the W for a wider wall, and then he maxes the Q and finally the W. For item builds, Froggen actually goes a pretty standard route every game almost, and it goes like this. You start with a Doran's Ring, 2 Biscuits and the Warding Totem, and then throughout the game you can, before you upgrade to the Greater Stealth Totem, you can replace the Warding Totem with a Lance and buy some wards and potions of course to get some vision down and deny vision from the enemy, but especially in the later stage of the game, the mini sidestone, the upgraded Warding Totem is pretty strong, so he gets that almost every game. But for core items you want to rush tier into Rod of Ages into CDR boots, and the reason for that is that you want to start stacking your tier as early as possible, and then of course the same goes for the Rod of Ages. Your mid-game goals should be CDR boots, Seraph's Embrace, Rod of Ages and Void Staff of course, or in the early late game as well. And you can definitely see the final build aren't really that much different, but you either get items such as Garden Angel, Sonia's Hourglass especially, Radabaddon's Death Cap for more damage and stuff like that. But you can also get situational items such as Lyandra's Torment against HP stacking teams, and of course you want to get the Home Guard enchant and the Sorcerer Elixir whenever you need it, so when defending the base or when you want the power spike in the mid or late game. When playing Anivia, it's very important to know how to last it with auto attacks, because saving your spells to trade is important in pretty much every matchup. So you want to land your QQE combo in lane early to harass the enemy down and eventually get a kill if possible with your Ignite and auto attacks, especially because you don't have an escape spell. You need to buy wards throughout the game to avoid getting ganked, so of course that's also why you get the Greater Stealth Totem, the Warding Totem upgrade pretty early into the game as well. Now you want to scale into the strong late game of course, because that's why you build tier into Roa, 2 stacking items pretty much, which allows you to hit some very strong power spikes in the mid and early stage of the late game. You also want to farm constantly. Froggen is a farming king for a reason, because Anivia is a champion that can benefit heavily from farm and can just clear waves and jungle camps very quickly with the ultimate and the E double damage. Of course, in the late game you have two choices. Either you want to catch a squishy out with your burst combo and burst him down quickly, or if you can pull it off, if the tank line engages on your team in team fights and you can wall them off, sometimes it's easier to just focus them down and either disengage or mess up the back line, which doesn't have the tank and the front line of course anymore. Let's talk about some spell combos when playing Anivia, because there are quite a few of them. Most importantly, and the very basic combo, is the QQE combo, where you just harass the enemy in lane. And I want to mention that between the spells, of course, you want to fade in as many auto attacks as possible to maximize your damage, so that goes for most of the trading combos here. Next up we have the ER or the RE combo, which is just a quick burst kind of combo where you cast your ultimate and then immediately use the E to do the double damage on the E spell of course. It also can be done with the E first, but you have to activate your ultimate before the E lands. That's very important to get the improved damage. Another combo you can do later on when you have your wall at level 8 is to trap the enemy and decide where he has to go and lead him into your Q kind of, so it goes W, Q, Q, E to get the damage off as well. And of course later on that turns into an all-in combo if you add Ignite and your ultimate and second E, for example, which really spikes down enemies and bursts them very hard. When all-inning an enemy, it's definitely important to get the double damage from E on every cast. For example, in this clip you can see how he combines the trap combo with the ultimate, the quick burst and everything together, so it goes like this, usually R or W first and the other spell E, Q, Q, Ignite and auto attacks if possible, and the second E will seal the deal here, but Froggen in this case backs up and doesn't get the kill, but that just shows how it's done. In the laning phase, especially early into the game, you need to last it with your auto attacks to save your spells to harass or basically protect yourself against incoming ganks with your stun, with your Q stun, but then again, hitting the creeps at the right time with the very slow auto attack animation is not an easy task, and even if you get pushed under your own turret, you need to know how to last it better or more effectively to not miss all the CS and get your scaling items as early as possible. In the early game, if you're not busy last hitting, you can definitely harass the enemy with your Q, and Froggen calls this fishing for Qs. Basically you try to land a Q or both parts of the Q and get some damage off with auto attacks as well. If that doesn't happen, you have to back off, because if you miss a Q, the enemy knows that he can go in and get some damage in return. Of course, even at level 2 with the Q and E, you have a very nice early power spike, and Froggen sometimes abuses this heavily against squishy enemies to get and kill and get the snowball running. So that's something you can do, and it definitely shouldn't underestimate the early damage that Anivia can pull off. So some solo kills will be shown here against several different laners. For example, this Vladimir as well, who overextends, and he does underestimate Anivia damage as well, especially with the Ignite. You do a lot of damage, and he's just a free kill at this point in time for Froggen. At level 6 you will hit a second big power spike with your ultimate, because then it is even easier to all-in an enemy because of the slow, of course. And you can see right here how it can work with combining some combos I showed you earlier. You can get an easy kill at level 6 as well. To do so, however, you have to be very careful and ward continuously throughout the game. Here are some warding spots you can use to stay safe during the laning phase. If you don't have any kill pressure on the enemy despite having Ignite, you can definitely turn the laning phase into a farm fest. So you want to stay in lane, farm creeps, farm monsters, farm the jungle creeps as well. Rotate to blue buff if possible, get the blue buff and get more mana regen to do this continuously. And it just shows how you just go between the lane, clear it instantly with your ultimate, just use it all the time to clear the wave quickly and then just back off if you're low, and basically refill your mana at base and just go back to lane and do this all the time. Now of course, as Anivia you're very blue buff reliant, and that's why you also should try to get it throughout the game. When team fighting on Anivia, the zone control with your ultimate, the wall, the Q and positioning is key. For example, a bad team fight would start out like this, you get caught and die pretty early into the fight. This is just something you don't want, of course, to happen, and it just snowballs the fight in the enemy team's favor if something like this happens. Now a better way to teamfight would be to stay further back and use your AoE spells to either zone the enemy in a small corridor such as this one in the jungle, for example, similar to how Azir positions his soldiers to zone the enemies or just control a zone by himself, and also use your Q effectively to stun one or more enemies, either a high priority target or more enemies if possible. For example, in this clip you can see how it's done well, and he can use the wall and the Q to even lead the enemy into his stun once again. In order to reach your late game prowess, you have to last hit perfectly with your auto attacks, or at least very well. For example, you can see in this clip even Froggen himself misses some auto attacks or some last hits throughout the early stages of the game easily, because it's not easy to land these auto attacks with the slow auto attack animation, but you need to do that perfectly, or at least very well, to scale faster into the late game to get your tier or your Rod of Ages earlier. And even with her spells, sometimes it's easy to miss the last hits. For example, in this clip he misses the cannon creep with the E usage even, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's talk about your passive for a second, because how you position yourself and where you end up dying can determine if the usage was correct or very, very bad. For example, in this first clip you can see that he gets chased down by the Diana later on, and you can see that he flashes even, but gets caught once again, and it just shows that if you end up dying in a position where nobody can help you, it's pretty much wasted. So you don't want anything like that to happen. Instead, for example, in the following clip you can see how it can turn out in a better way. You can see how he chased down the Ahri here. He basically even goes very, very hard. The Ahri ults away, but he even flashes over the wall to finalize the kill. You can see it in a second right here, but notice how his own allies are here to help him when the Fizz kills him. Basically for the first time he eggs basically in this position, but nobody can follow up on a kill, and it's just a very, very well used passive in this case. Even though you get the Anivia wall pretty late into the game at level 8, it's a very important tool in team fights. So for example, you want to wall off the enemies, split them off from their team to get an easier kill instead of trapping your own allies. Of course, that's something that you don't want to do. It's a very, very big no-no. Instead, for example, you can wait for the tank to engage and then wall off the other enemies of the enemy team, of course, and get an easy kill, because of course even a tank dies fast if 5 people focus him down. Other than that, the combos are very important to practice and perfect, because as you can see here, they do a lot of damage in the later stages of the game with some AP, and they can catch the enemies off guard. Especially the E damage is very, very high if you manage to land it. And even in the early game, of course, it shouldn't be underestimated, because as you can see here, the damage is pretty high if you hit the E. I want to highlight once more how much of a farm king or queen rather Anivia is, because you really can push waves very quickly and get the jungle creeps in between as well, so that's something you want to do. And of course staying safe with the warding spree, as you can do it sometimes here with a pink ward and then some normal wards, is key, because even with denying vision you can sometimes get catches such as this one on weak enemy supports. Anivia is very good at defending the base, especially against super creeps, because she just clears them so quickly. What is that good for, you're asking? Well, you can of course prolong the game and maybe get a catch and turn the fight around, but even then it's important to not miss position throughout the game. If you, for example, overextend and overstep your boundaries, for example, you don't have an escape spell yourself, even if a flash is down, it's even worse. Well, anybody will catch up to you with a gap closer and then CC you, probably. Since you don't have an escape, you will simply die there, and the enemy team will capitalize on this simple mistake. Let's take a look at the game plan once more, because now everything should be crystal clear to you guys, no pun intended. But basically you want to skill into the late game with your Tyr and Roa build, and of course don't wall off your own allies, but use it in a very good position, for example, to decide team fights. So that's it for this time, and let's move on to the end screen. Welcome to the end screen, to the 10th episode. It's kind of like a birthday in my eyes. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, thanks for liking and sharing this video. On the right hand side, you know it by now, I think there's a link to the previous episode about how to play Rumble like Darius. Of course, down below there is a link to the playlist where you can find every single episode I've made so far. So that makes my 10th installment, and I'm pretty glad I could make it that far, and that you continued to support me on this journey. And I'm very glad that I will be hitting 5k subscribers, if it's not already at that benchmark. So yeah, thanks a lot for your continued support, and I hope I will see you in the next episode. Until next time, bye bye.